It's been said that most people don't quit their jobs, they quit their managers or their bosses. Have you ever had a job you liked, but a boss you couldn't stand? And what does this possibly have to do with the purpose of this podcast, which is to help people become spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart? There's a connection. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about that today.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
In 2020 and 2021, so many people quit their jobs that it became known as the Great Resignation. And it had a huge impact, not just economically here in the United States and in other places around the world, but it's impacted entire industries significantly. You know, historically, we've considered what's happened to towns and areas when factories closed, and we've probably seen the photos of towns before and after in areas when there was a thriving industry and then the factory shuts down and all of a sudden it looks kind of like a ghost town. Now we have major office buildings and commercial real estate that are sitting vacant or nearly vacant and whose value has dropped exponentially. The impact of all of that job changing is still with us, and we aren't really even fully experiencing all of the significance of that yet. And what's become known following the Great Resignation is the Great Reshuffling. And what's interesting, because studies are still kind of mixed and they're still a little bit early to indicate this on a longitudinal way, but happiness levels for people who change jobs seems to indicate that people were much happier for a while, actually for about a year. And then it seems that happiness levels dropped. Well, there can be a lot of factors for why that's the case, but one of those is because the reality of the new job and the new people that come with it sets in. That honeymoon kind of phase is over, and people begin to understand and live with the reality. There are no perfect jobs because there are no perfect colleagues, and there are no perfect clients, and there are no perfect bosses. Now, maybe you're tuning in and you're like, okay, wait a minute. This is starting to sound like a business podcast, and I didn't think that's what this was about. Well, you're right, it's not. But most of us can relate to this example of how we view and the experiences that we've had with bosses. And this is something that I want you to keep in mind as we talking about how we view the gospel. How do we really truly view the Christian faith? Because that same pattern that can happen in the way that people views their bosses can happen also as it comes to our faith. Now, certainly this can happen on a church level, but that's really not going to be what I focus on today. But what I mean by that is people can move from one church to another in search of a better staff or a congregation, or people have just decided to opt out of church in person and let's just do virtual church because, you know, and I'm not dissing that and saying that that has no value or has no place. But it also depends on why a person is doing that. And is it because, oh, well, then I don't have to deal with real people? And sometimes people leave churches. It's not always for negative reasons. You know, sometimes it's because, okay, I need to move either because I need to grow personally. And this is just no longer the right place for that. It doesn't always have to be some big negative reason. Or it can be because I'm going to go somewhere else and I'm going to help another church flourish. And that can also be a reason why people change churches. But what I want to talk about today is how we view the gospel and how it impacts how we show up in life, not primarily how we show up in church. Well, that's a secondary part of that. But we can tend to view the gospel, the Christian faith, I think in one of three ways, similar to how we can view a boss. We either can see a boss that we can never please. We are never going to be able to do enough to earn this person's respect or their approval. Temporarily we might, but we know that they're always going to go back to this default negative tyrannical way of dealing with us. The second way that we can approach this as a well-meaning but kind of inept boss that we like personally, but we wouldn't look to for professional guidance or growth. And sometimes those are the bosses that really create quandaries for people because it's like, I like this person personally and I like my job, but after a while, just recognizing they don't have the skill set, they don't have the mindset, they don't have the time, the energy, the resources, the desire, whatever, to really help provide what I need for professional guidance or for growth. And those can be the bosses that sometimes are the hardest to leave. Or third, we can have a boss who wants us to succeed, somebody who we respect, we look at and we say, wow, they're doing their job well. And rather than seeing us as a threat, there's somebody that we're going to look to who has the wisdom that we need to help us grow and succeed. Through much of our cultural history in the U.S., it was the first example that tended to characterize Christianity. Christianity could be seen as this demanding, tyrannical belief that a person could never do enough. A person was never going to measure up. We were always going to fall short and be met with an angry response. And this would have been characterized by a heavy emphasis on what historically would have been called like fire and brimstone, hell-centered kind of teaching. And there are still some remnants of that thinking with us today, especially in certain areas of the country or in certain age categories. But culturally, I think overall, the pendulum swung to the other extreme. And, many people today would have no idea of what the phrase fire and brimstone even meant. But the pendulum has swung so that it's more that Christianity it's a nice idea. And a person goes so far as to accept Christ as Savior in the same way that if I'm working in a job and I think, okay, yeah, I accept that person as my manager. They're my boss. I get that. I report to them. I understand that. I'm all good with that. But we don't really accept Christianity as an authority that's really relevant to our everyday life. It's kind of like this boss who just remains behind a closed office door and we only knock on that door to ask for help in extreme situations when there's an emergencies. But, we're not looking to that boss for the routine, everyday, day-to-day kind of stuff of life. And that's how we can also approach Christianity. And in both cases, what we end up with are two different forms of a gospel of sin management. And in the first, it's that Christianity is this tyrannical, demanding, punitive boss. And in the second, Christianity is this nice but irrelevant boss that's just reserved for emergencies and, maybe like a weekly check-in. I want you to really think about how you perceive Christianity and the gospel. Dallas Willard, whose writing has had a significant impact in my faith, and I wish I would have come to know his works years before I did, but he writes powerfully and eloquently about this concept of the gospel of sin management in his book, The Divine Conspiracy Rediscovering Our Hidden Life in God. Fantastic book. It's not like a book that you just sit down and breeze through. At least I didn't. And many of the women that participated in a book study with me didn't, because his writing it's very readable. It's not like, oh, I have to labor through this archaic tome, but it's the depth of his material just makes you want to say, I need to soak this in slowly, because this is some really meaningful stuff that really challenges my beliefs and my thoughts. And yet at the same time, profoundly relevant to everyday life. So I want to read some quotes that he had in his book, The Divine Conspiracy, on this whole issue of, do we approach the gospel as basically being like a sin management kind of thing? Here we go. Can we seriously believe that God would establish a plan for us that essentially bypasses the awesome needs of present human life and leaves human character untouched? Would he leave us even temporarily marooned with no help in our kind of world, with our kinds of problems, psychological, emotional, social, and global? Can we believe that the essence of Christian faith and salvation covers nothing but death and after? Can we believe that being saved really has nothing whatever to do with the kind of persons we are? Are we to suppose that God gives us nothing that really influences character and spirituality? And are we to suppose that, in fact, Jesus has no substantial impact on our real lives? History has brought us to the point where the Christian message is thought to be essentially concerned with only how to deal with sin, with wrongdoing or wrong being and its effects. Life, our actual existence, is not included in what is now presented as the heart of the Christian message, or is included only marginally. The current gospel then becomes a gospel of sin management. Transformation of life and character is no part of the redemptive message. End quote. Oh, that is relevant to us, and it requires us to really look at, how do we approach our Christian faith? Well, I mean, what do we really think about its role in our life? Do we see it as this tyrannical force that's just always waiting to check every box for everything that we've done wrong so they can lash out some sort of punishment? Or, and I think this is probably more likely in our culture here in the United States, it's more of the, okay, that's a nice idea. I've checked the one big box of salvation, and maybe there's a few boxes under that I've checked, but most of the rest of my life, the gospel is not really relevant to in terms of how I actually live. Now, it's not so much that I would say that from a position of belief. It's more that I would practice that from a position of how I show up every single day. It's not so much something that I would say to someone in my words, but it is what I say by how I live my life. Well, in the upcoming weeks, we're going to be looking at the how big and relevant is our gospel really? I mean, to us. I mean, how can we think that anybody else really needs the gospel or anything more than just enough of it to, quote, get them saved so they can go to heaven? And we're not going to be terribly motivated necessarily to share the gospel if that's how we see it, whether it's with the tyrannical boss or it's with the kind but inept one. One of the specific ways that we're going to be looking at that is through a familiar Bible passage called the Beatitudes. Now, if you just heard that and went, oh, yeah, the Beatitudes, yeah, I've read that, I know that, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes when something is familiar to us, we risk thinking that we know it, we get it, we understand it. And the Beatitudes are one of those things that, they look beautiful, in calligraphy, some sort of wall art, and they sound great. And there are messages that can show up on bumper stickers and all that kind of thing. But when we really dig into the Beatitudes, wow, do they show the relevance of the gospel and this life of faith to how we show up in every single part of our life. And it shows that the gospel is not about sin management. It is so much more than that. So just get prepared. We're gonna be walking through those. We're also going to have some upcoming interviews. There are people that I want to introduce you to, and so that you get to meet and you get to hear their message. So you're going to have some of that coming up in the weeks ahead as well. I invite you then in preparation, not only for these interviews, but in preparation for our dive into the Beatitudes. I want you to really consider, how do you view the gospel? And don't look at that as in terms of, you have to come up with the right answer. Just be honest with yourself about how do you really see the Christian faith? Is it with that tyrannical boss? Is it with the kind but inept one? Or is it that the Christian faith, this gospel, this good news, is it something that you really see as that boss whose wisdom that you need, not just for emergencies, not just for the big stuff, but something that you need every single day in order to show up and to live your one precious life well? Wise people and mature people are curious people. People who retain their curiosity and their teachability are people who continue to grow throughout life, because you've heard me say this before. There is no neutral in life. You are either growing or you are decaying. That's it. There's no just, I'm just kind of maintaining. Life is impossible. It's impossible to do that in our lives. We're either growing or we are decaying. And so just, have curiosity and have the willingness to really dig in and to examine, what's your real mindset about this whole Christian, faith thing. Hey, I've got 2 things that I'm going to invite you to do as you are thinking about this topic over the coming days. Number 1 is to share this podcast. Send a text to a friend. Hit a share button on the podcast app that you're listening to this to. Write a quick email to, a group, to friends, post it on your social media account. Let other people know that, hey, this is something that's worth listening to. And the other thing is, if you haven't already, you need to go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter there, High Impact. It's a totally free resource, and it's going to give you links, not just to things that I create for the podcast or other things, but it's also going to give you information about other people and resources that can help you in this endeavor. That is to be spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart. All right, my friend, remember this and live like this is true, because it is. You have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.